Here we are. We're back. We're back. And hey, we left off yesterday on chapter 13, and today we're going to read chapters 13, 14, and 15. So we got a lot of ground to cover, and a lot of life-changing things are going to happen. So here we go, chapter 13. A few minutes later, Mrs. Spider made the first bed. It was hanging from the ceiling, suspended by a rope of threads at either end that actually looked more like a hammock than a bed. But it was a magnificent affair, and the stuff it was made of shimmered like silk in the pale light. "I do hope you'll find it comfortable," Miss Spider said to the old green grasshopper. I made it as soft and silky as I possibly could. I spun it with gossamer. That's a much better quality thread than the one that I used for my own web. "Thank you so much, dear lady," the old green grasshopper said, climbing into the hammock. "Ah, this is just what I needed. Good night, everybody, good night." Then Miss Spider spun the next hammock, and the ladybug got in. After that, she spun a long one for the centipede, and an even longer one for the earthworm. "How do you like your bed?" she said to James when it came to his turn. "Hard or soft?" "I like it soft, thank you very much," James answered. "For goodness sake, stop staring around the room and get on with my boots," the centipede said. "You and I are never going to get any sleep at this rate. And kindly line them up neatly in pairs as you take them off. Don't just throw them over your shoulder." James worked away frantically at the centipede's boots. Each one had laces and had to be untied and loosened before it could be pulled off. And to make matters worse, all the laces were tied up in the most complicated knots that had to be unpicked with fingernails. It was just awful. It took about 2 hours, and by the time James had pulled off the last boot, all had been lined up in a row on the floor, 21 pairs altogether. The centipede was fast asleep. "Wake up, centipede," whispered James, giving him a gentle dig in the stomach. "It's time for bed." "Thank you, my dear child," the centipede said, opening his eyes. Then he got down off the sofa and ambled across the room and crawled into his hammock. James got into his own hammock, and oh, how soft and comfortable it was compared to the hard, bare boards that his aunts had always made him sleep upon at home. "Lights out," the centipede said drowsily. Nothing happened. "Turn out the light," he called in a loud voice. James glanced around the room, wondering which of the others he might be talking to when they were asleep. The old green grasshopper was snoring loudly as though through his nose. The ladybug was making whistling sounds as she breathed, and the earthworm was coiled up like a spring on one end of the hammock, wheezing and blowing through his open mouth. As for Miss Spider, she made a lovely web for herself across one corner of the room, and James could see her crouching in the very center of it, mumbling softly in her dreams. "I said turn out the light," shouted the centipede angrily. "Are you talking to me?" James answered him. "Of course I'm not talking to you," the centipede answered. "That crazy glowworm has gone to sleep with her light on." For the first time since entering the room, James glanced up at the ceiling, and there he saw the most extraordinary sight. Something that looked like a gigantic fly without wings, it was at least 3 feet long, was standing upside down upon its 6 legs in the middle of the ceiling. And the tail end of the creature seemed to be literally on fire. A brilliant greenish light, as bright as the brightest electric bulbs, was shining out of its tail and lighting up the whole room. "Is that a glowworm?" asked James, staring at the light. "It doesn't look like any glowworm of any sort to me." "Of course it's a glowworm," the centipede answered. "At least that's what she calls herself. Although, actually, you are quite right. She isn't really a worm at all. Glowworms are never worms. They're simply lady fireflies without wings." "Wake up, you lazy beast!" But the glowworm didn't stir, and so the centipede reached out of the hammock and picked up one of his boots from the floor. "Put out that wretched light," he shouted, hurling the boots up at the ceiling. The glowworm slowly opened one eye and stared at the centipede. "There's no need to be rude," she said coldly. "All in good time." Come on, come on, come on, shouted the centipede, or I'll put you out. I'll put it out for you. Oh, hello, James, the glowworm said, looking down and giving James a wave and a smile. I didn't see you come in. Welcome, my dear boy. Welcome, and good night. Then click, out went the light. Henry James Trotter lay in the darkness with his eyes wide open, listening to the strange sleeping noises that the creatures were making all around him, and wondering what on earth was going to happen to him in the morning. Already he was beginning to like his new friends very much. They were not nearly as terrible as they looked. In fact, they really weren't terrible at all. They seemed extremely kind and helpful in spite of all the shouting and arguing that went on between them. Good night, old green grasshopper, he whispered. Good night, Ladybug. Good night, Miss Spider. But before he could go through them all, he had fallen fast asleep. Chapter 14. We're off, somebody was shouting. We're off at last. James woke up with a jump and looked around him. The creatures were all out of their hammocks and moving excitedly around the room. Suddenly, the floor gave a great heave, and as though an earthquake had taken place. Here we go, shouted the old green grasshopper, hopping up and down with excitement. Hold on tight. What's happening? Cried James, leaping out of his hammock. What's going on? The ladybug, who was obviously a kind and gentle creature, came over and stood beside him. In case you don't know it, she said, we're about to depart forever from the top of this ghastly hill that we've all been living on for so long. We're about to roll away inside this great, big, beautiful peach to the land of what? Asked James. Never you mind, said the ladybug. But nothing could be worse than this desolate hilltop and those two repulsive aunts of yours. Hear, hear, they all shouted. Hear, hear. You may not have noticed it, the ladybug went on, but the whole garden, even before it reached the steep edge of the hill, happens to be on a steep slope, and therefore the only thing that's been stopping the peach from rolling away from the beginning was that thick stem attached to the tree. Break the stem and off we go. Watch it, cried Miss Spider as the room gave another violent lurch. Here we go. Not quite, not quite. At this moment, continued the ladybug, our centipede, who has a pair of jaws sharp as razors, is up there on top of the peach, nibbling away at that stem. In fact, he must be nearly through it, as you can tell from the way we're lurching about. Would you like me to take you under my wing so you won't fall when we start rolling? That's very kind of you, said James, but I think I'll be all right. Just then, the centipede stuck his grinning face through the hole in the ceiling and shouted, I've done it! We're off! We're off! The others cried, We're off! The journey begins, shouted the centipede, and who knows where it'll end, muttered the earthworm. If you have anything to do with it, it can only mean trouble. Nonsense, said the ladybug. We're about to visit the most marvelous places and see the most wonderful things. Isn't that so, centipede? There is no knowing what we shall see, cried the centipede. And he goes on to recite a new little song or poem. We may see a creature with 49 heads who lives in desolate snow. And whenever he catches cold, which he dreads, he has 49 noses to blow. We may see the venomous pink-spotted scrunch, who can chew up a man with one bite. It likes to eat 5 of them roasted for a lunch and 18 for supper at night. We may see a dragon, and nobody knows that we won't see a unicorn there. There may be a terrible monster with toes growing out of tufts of its hair. We may see a sweet, bitty bright hen, so playful and kind, well-bred, and such beautiful eggs. You just boil them and then they explode and blow off your head. A grim and an rhinoceros, surely you will see an enormous noble gnat, whose sting goes in at the knee and comes out through the top of your bat or your hat. We may get lost by the frozen frost. We may die in an earthquake or tremor, or nastier still, we may even be tossed by the thorns of a furious dilemma. But who cares? Let us go from this horrible hill. Let us roll, let us bowl, let us plunge. Let's go rolling and bowling and spinning until we're away from old Spiker and Sponge. 1 second later, slowly, insidiously, or most gently, the great Peach started to lean forward and steal into motion. The whole room began to tilt over, and all the furniture went sliding across the floor and crashed into the far wall. So did James and the ladybug and the old green grasshopper and Mrs. Spider and the earthworm and the centipede, who had just come slithering quickly down the wall. Okay, this is chapter 15. Outside the garden, at that very moment, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker had just taken their place in the front gate, with a bunch of tickets in their hand, and the first stream of early morning sightseers were visible in the distance, climbing up the hill to visit the Peach. "We shall make a fortune today," Aunt Spiker was saying. "Just look at all those people. I wonder what became of that horrid little boy of ours last night," Aunt Sponge said. "He never did come back in, did he?" "He probably fell down in the dark and broke his leg," Aunt Spiker said. "Or his neck, maybe," Aunt Sponge said hopefully. "Just wait till I get my hands on him," Aunt Spiker said, waving her cane. "He'll never want to stay out all night again. By the time I've finished with him, goodness gracious me, what an awful noise." Both women swung around to look. The noise, of course, had been caused by the giant Peach crashing through the fence that surrounded it. And now, gathering speed every second, it came rolling across the garden towards the place where Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker were standing. They gasped. They screamed. They started to run. They panicked. They both got in each other's way. They began pushing and jostling, and each of them was thinking only about saving herself. Aunt Sponge, the fat one, tipped over a box she brought along to keep money in and fell flat on her face. Aunt Spiker immediately tripped over Aunt Sponge and came down on top of her. They both lay on the ground, fighting, clawing, yelling, and struggling frantically to get back up again. But before they could do this, the mighty Peach was upon them. There was a crunch, and there was silence. The Peach rolled on, and behind them, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker lay ironed out on the grass, as flat and thin and lifeless as a couple of paper dolls cut out of a picture book. Oh man, this was always something that whenever I would read this to my other classes, that everybody would just kind of like laugh, because the picture of it is almost like watching a cartoon or something. But Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker didn't think it was very funny, I don't think. So anyway, that is it for this week. I think we've gotten 15 chapters covered, and I think we'll do another 15 next week, and then another 15 or so after that. And my goal is that in the next 2 weeks, we'll have this book all finished. And so make sure you guys are working on your packet and getting those pages up to date. There is a pretty good movie that came out a while back of James and the Giant Peach. And I only say it's a pretty good movie. It's a little different from the book, but it's good. It's good. But do me a favor, don't watch it. If you haven't seen it yet, don't watch it until we finish the book. And then that might be a kind of a fun thing that we can do. It'd be really fun is if we could even set up like a watch party or something like that and sort of watch the movie together. I don't know, I'll play around with that technology and see if that's even something we could do. Anyway, I hope you guys are doing great. The weekend is upon us, and hey, have a great weekend. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful couple of days. So get outside, enjoy the day. I'm hoping and praying, I really am, that we get back together again, and sooner rather than later. So anyway, love you guys. You guys take care, and be great to your parents. We'll talk to you later.